The stars had never looked so bright to Elena Vasquez as they did on that morning. She stood at the window of her small cabin on the diplomatic ship Aurora, watching the endless black of space stretch out before her. Today was the day. After 30 years of working her way up through Earth's diplomatic service, after countless negotiations and treaties and sleepless nights, she had been chosen for the most important mission in human history. Today, humanity would ask to join the Galactic Council. Elena was 52 years old. Her dark hair had streaks of gray in it now, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 10 years ago. But her mind was sharp, her will was iron, and her belief in humanity's future among the stars was absolute. She had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. She had studied the customs of 412 alien species. She had memorized trade statistics, scientific achievements, cultural exchanges. She had practiced her speech until she could deliver it in her sleep. Earth deserved a place at the galactic table. Elena was going to make sure they got it. The Aurora's captain, a quiet man named David Chen, appeared at her door. His face was serious but not worried. He had served with Elena for 15 years and he trusted her completely. "We're approaching the council station, Ambassador," he said. "We'll dock in 2 hours." Elena nodded. "Thank you, Captain. I'll be ready." She turned back to the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars she could see, lay the center of galactic civilization. The council station had floated in that spot for 11,000 years. It was older than human civilization itself, older than the pyramids, older than the first cities, older than agriculture. And today, Elena Vasquez would walk into its grand chamber and ask for humanity's place in history. She took a deep breath and began to get ready. The council station was enormous. Elena had seen pictures, of course, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The station stretched across space like a small moon, its crystalline spires catching the light of the artificial sun that Anthropic had built to warm it. Ships from hundreds of worlds clustered around it like bees around a hive. The Aurora was tiny compared to most of them. Human ships were still primitive by galactic standards. They used fusion drives while other species bent space itself. They had basic shields while others could become invisible or phase through solid matter. They were babies taking their first steps while the rest of the galaxy ran marathons. But everyone had to start somewhere. Elena made her way through the docking procedures with the help of a translation device implanted behind her ear. The device was a gift from a friendly species called the Mendari, who had been trading with humans for about 40 years. It allowed her to understand any language and be understood in return. The station's interior was even more impressive than its exterior. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate species of all sizes, from tiny crystalline beings no bigger than Elena's hand to massive creatures that could have swallowed her ship whole. The walls shifted colors based on the emotional states of those nearby, and the air was perfectly balanced to support dozens of different atmospheric requirements. Elena's escort was a robot of some kind, sleek and silver and completely silent. It led her through the winding corridors toward the grand chamber, past markets and meeting halls and gardens filled with plants from 1,000 worlds. She saw species she recognized from her studies, the Vorthani, who were basically giant jellyfish that communicated through color changes, the Kralith, beings of pure energy who lived inside crystal containers, the insectoid Zilvari, whose high arbiter ruled the council itself. And she saw species she had never encountered before, creatures of fire and ice, of metal and light, of forms so strange her mind struggled to process them. All of them stopped to stare at her as she passed. Elena kept her head high and her expression calm. She was representing 8 billion human beings. She would not show fear. The grand chamber was a cathedral of light and crystal. Its ceiling rose so high it was lost in a soft glow, and its walls were lined with thousands of seats arranged in tiers that climbed toward the heavens. Representatives from 412 species filled those seats, a rainbow of forms and colors and textures that made Elena's head spin. At the center of the chamber, raised above everything else, sat the High Council, 5 beings from the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They had guided the council for millennia. Their word was law. At their center sat High Arbiter Zilvex, a Zilvari who had held his position for over 300 years. His insectoid body was covered in ceremonial metals that glittered in the chamber's light. His compound eyes reflected Elena's image 1,000 times over as she approached the petitioner's podium. The podium was a simple platform at the chamber's center, surrounded on all sides by the assembled representatives. Elena walked to it alone, human tradition for diplomatic missions, one person to speak for all. She stopped at the podium and waited. The chamber fell silent. 412 species, thousands of beings, all watching a single human woman. High Arbiter Zilvex's voice echoed through the chamber, translated instantly by Elena's implant. The Galactic Council recognizes the representative of the planet Earth, third world of the Sol system in the Orion arm of the galaxy. State your name and purpose. Elena took a deep breath. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing the United Earth Confederacy. I come before this council to formally request associate membership for humanity in the Galactic Council. A murmur ran through the chamber. Elena had expected this. Associate membership was a big ask for a species as young as humanity, but she believed they had earned it. The council acknowledges Earth's petition, Zilvex said. You may present your case. Elena activated the holographic display she had brought. Images of Earth appeared in the air around her, beautiful and blue and alive. Humanity has been a spacefaring species for only 63 years, she began. In that time, we have established colonies on 3 worlds. We have developed faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, and advanced medical technologies that have extended our average lifespan by 30 years. She changed the images. Now they showed human scientists working alongside aliens, human ships carrying trade goods, human diplomats shaking hands with a dozen different species. We have established peaceful trade relations with 47 species. We have contributed to scientific research in fields ranging from quantum physics to xenobiology. We have shared our art, our music, our literature with the galaxy, and we have eagerly learned from the cultures we have encountered. Another change, human soldiers now, fighting alongside aliens against pirates and raiders. We have contributed to galactic peacekeeping efforts. Human volunteers have served in 12 different security operations over the past 20 years. We have lost over 1,000 lives defending species we had barely met. Elena paused, letting the images fade. She looked up at the assembled representatives. We are young. We know this. We are still learning, still growing, still finding our place among the stars. But we believe that our youth is a strength, not a weakness. We bring fresh perspectives, new ideas, different ways of thinking that can benefit the entire galactic community. She stood straighter, letting her voice fill the chamber. Humanity asks not for charity, but for partnership. Not for handouts, but for the opportunity to prove ourselves. We ask for a seat at this table, not because we demand it, but because we believe we have earned the right to be heard. She bowed her head slightly. The United Earth Confederacy formally requests associate membership in the Galactic Council. We offer our friendship, our cooperation, and our earnest desire to contribute to the peace and prosperity of all species. Elena fell silent. She had said what she came to say. Now it was up to the council. High Arbiter Zilvex's compound eyes flickered. The council has heard Earth's petition. The floor is open for deliberation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice rang out from somewhere in the upper tiers. 63 years? It was the Vorthani delegate, a massive gelatinous creature whose surface rippled with colors that Elena's implant translated as amused disbelief. These creatures have possessed faster-than-light travel for 63 of their years, and they believe this qualifies them for council membership? Laughter. The sound was strange, translated into 100 different forms, clicks and whistles and color changes and magnetic pulses, but unmistakably laughter. Elena felt her face grow warm, but she kept her expression neutral. Their species still measures time by the rotation of their single planet, the Vorthani continued. They haven't even standardized their calendar to galactic norms. More laughter. Another voice joined in. The Kralith delegate, a being of pure energy inside a crystal cage. Their species nearly destroyed itself with nuclear fission. They discovered the atom and immediately built weapons. They bombed their own cities with them. The laughter grew louder. They cannot even agree among themselves, added a four-armed being from the hegemony of 12 stars. Their world contains 193 separate governments. They have not achieved planetary unity. They eat the flesh of other creatures, someone called from the back. Animals that can feel pain and fear. They raise them in cages and slaughter them by the billions. They sleep for a third of their existence. They die after less than 100 years. Their primary recreational activity involves exposing themselves to harmful solar radiation on beaches. The Grand Chamber erupted. 412 species united in mocking laughter at the small, fragile, short-lived creatures who had dared to ask for a place among them. Elena stood at the podium, surrounded by the sound, and felt something change inside her. She had expected resistance. She had expected tough questions and difficult negotiations. She had not expected this. This was not negotiation. This was not deliberation. This was contempt. Pure and simple contempt for everything humanity was. She looked at the faces around her. Some species didn't laugh. Some watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. But most of them joined in the mockery. Most of them looked at her and saw nothing worth respecting. The laughter went on for almost 10 minutes. Finally, High Arbiter Zilvex raised one of his limbs, calling for silence. The chamber slowly quieted, though ripples of amusement still ran through the crowd. The council appreciates humanity's enthusiasm, Zilvex said. His mandibles clicked in what Elena now recognized as his own form of laughter. It is always refreshing to see a young species so eager to prove itself. He leaned forward, his compound eyes fixed on Elena. However, the council must consider the broader picture. Associate membership requires a species to meet certain standards of development, stability, and contribution. Humanity, while showing promise, is simply too young, too primitive, too divided. He spread his upper limbs in a gesture that might have been meant as kindness, but felt like condescension. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when your species has matured, you might resubmit your petition. For now, we suggest you return to your corner of the Orion Arm and continue your development in peaceful isolation. He paused, and Elena saw his mandibles click again. Assuming you don't destroy yourselves first. One final wave of laughter rolled through the chamber. Elena stood very still. The sound washed over her like a wave, and she let it come. She had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had been insulted before. She had been dismissed before. She had been laughed at before. But not like this. Never like this. Something shifted inside her. Something cold and hard and absolutely certain. She had come here hoping for acceptance. She had believed, truly believed, that if she presented humanity's case well enough, the council would see their worth. She had believed in the possibility of partnership, of friendship, of a shared future among the stars. She didn't believe that anymore. The laughter was still dying down when Elena reached up and removed the translation implant from behind her ear. The device wasn't meant to be removed easily, and pain flared through her skull as she pulled it free. But she ignored it. She held the implant in her hand for a moment, looking at it. Such a small thing, such a symbol of everything humanity had hoped for. Then she placed it carefully on the podium. The chamber fell silent. This was unexpected. No petitioner had ever done anything like this. Elena looked up at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. 412 species, 11,000 years of history, the combined wisdom of 1,000,000 worlds, and not one of them thought humanity worthy of a seat at their table. She didn't speak. What was there to say? They had made their position clear. No argument she could offer would change their minds. No evidence she could present would make them see humans as anything other than amusing primitives. So she said nothing at all. Elena Vasquez turned her back on the Galactic Council. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Her back was straight, her head was high, and she did not look back. The doors sealed behind her with a soft hiss. In the grand chamber, the laughter had stopped. The representatives exchanged uncertain glances. In 11,000 years of council history, no petitioner had ever simply left. They argued, they begged, they negotiated, they threatened. They wept and pleaded and promised. They did not walk away in silence. High Arbiter Zilvex's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "The petition is denied," he announced to the chamber. "Next order of business." But something had shifted in the crystalline room, something small and hard to define. The next speaker struggled to get the chamber's attention. Representatives whispered to each other, looking toward the door where the human had disappeared. In 11,000 years, no one had ever just walked away. It shouldn't have mattered. Humanity was nothing. A single species from a single world. Barely a heartbeat old by galactic standards. They had no power, no influence, no importance. But as the session continued, many of the delegates found themselves thinking about that silent departure, that straight back, that expression of perfect, cold calm. Something about it bothered them, something they couldn't quite name. On the Aurora, Elena Vasquez sat alone in her cabin. The ship had undocked the moment she returned, beginning the long journey back to Earth. Captain Chen had tried to speak with her, but she had waved him away. She needed time to think. The pain in her head where the implant had been was fading, but a deeper pain had taken its place. She had failed. She had traveled all this way, prepared all those months, believed with all her heart, and she had failed completely. The Council would never accept humanity. Not in 1,000 years, not in 1,000,000. They saw humans as insects, as amusements, as children playing at civilization, while the adults watched and laughed. Elena stared out at the stars, and slowly, her pain began to transform. Failure was familiar. She had failed before, many times. Failure was just another word for learning. Every diplomatic setback she had ever experienced had taught her something valuable. What had today taught her? She thought about the laughter, the contempt, the absolute certainty in those alien eyes that humanity was nothing and would always be nothing. They were wrong. Elena knew they were wrong. She had seen what humans could do when properly motivated. She had watched her species go from horses and telegrams to walking on the moon in less than a century. She had seen them survive wars and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed them. She had witnessed their stubborn refusal to give up, to give in, to accept that anything was impossible. The Council thought humanity was weak because they were young. They thought humans were primitive because they fought among themselves. They thought humans were worthless because they slept too much and ate meat and lived such short lives. They didn't understand anything. Humans weren't weak, they were determined. They weren't primitive. They were adaptable. They weren't worthless. They were very, very patient. Elena made a decision. She would return to Earth and tell them what had happened. She would tell them about the laughter and the contempt and the absolute rejection, and then she would suggest a different path. The Council had told humanity to develop in peaceful isolation. Fine. That was exactly what they would do. But not the way the Council expected. Humanity would develop. They would grow stronger. They would advance their technology and expand their territory and build something that didn't need the Council's approval. And when the day came that the Council needed something from humanity, when they finally understood what they had dismissed so carelessly, humanity would remember this day. They would remember the laughter. Elena Vasquez stared at the stars, and for the first time since leaving the Grand Chamber, she smiled. The Council had no idea what they had just started. Back in the Grand Chamber, the session had ended hours ago, but High Arbiter Zilvex remained at his seat. His aides had gone, the other delegates had departed, and the great room was empty except for him. He should have gone to rest. Tomorrow would be busy. There were always more petitions, more negotiations, more problems to solve. But he couldn't stop thinking about the human. It was absurd, of course. One primitive creature from one primitive world. Nothing worth remembering. In a few generations, humanity would probably destroy itself anyway. It's what young species did. But that walk, that silent, straight-backed walk out of the chamber. In 300 years of serving on the Council, Zilvex had seen thousands of petitioners. He had watched species beg and threaten and negotiate. He had seen them accept rejection with grace or with fury. He had never seen one simply walk away. There had been something in that human's eyes in those final moments, something he couldn't identify. Not anger, not hatred, not defeat, something worse, something like patience. Zilvex clicked his mandibles in dismissal. It was nothing. The human was nothing. In 1,000 years, no one would remember this day at all. He rose from his seat and headed for his quarters, pushing the incident from his mind. But somewhere in the back of his ancient brain, a small warning signal had begun to pulse. It would be many years before he understood what it meant. The first year after the Grand Chamber incident passed without notice, humanity's presence in galactic affairs had always been small. A few trading posts on the edges of council space, some scientific exchanges with friendly species, occasional diplomatic functions that humans attended more as observers than participants. All of that simply stopped. Human ships no longer appeared at council ports. Human delegates stopped attending interspecies conferences. The handful of human students studying at alien universities quietly withdrew and returned home. Nobody paid much attention. Humanity was a minor species. Their absence was barely noticed. On Earth, however, everything had changed. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had returned from the council station and immediately requested a meeting with the United Earth Confederacy's full governing council. She stood before the leaders of humanity and told them what had happened. Every word, every laugh, every insult. The recording of the Grand Chamber session played on every screen. Billions of humans watched as 412 alien species mocked their petition for membership. They watched their ambassador remove her translator implant and walk away in silence. And then Elena Vasquez told them her plan. They expect us to disappear, she said. They expect us to either destroy ourselves or spend the next 1,000 years begging for another chance. They think we're children who will cry and then come crawling back. She looked at the assembled leaders with eyes that had gone hard and cold. They're wrong. The plan was simple in concept but enormous in ambition. Humanity would cut itself off from the galactic community. They would stop seeking trade, stop attending functions, stop asking for anything from species who saw them as nothing. Instead, they would focus entirely on themselves. They would pour every resource into development. They would advance their technology by whatever means necessary. They would expand their territory, build their strength, create a civilization that didn't need the Council's approval, and they would do it in complete silence. They laughed at us for measuring time by our planet's rotation, Elena said. Let's see how they like being ignored for a few rotations of theirs. The plan was approved unanimously. The United Earth Confederacy sent one final message to every alien species they had previously contacted. It was brief and polite. The United Earth Confederacy thanks its galactic partners for their cooperation over the past several decades. Due to internal restructuring, we will be reducing our external engagement for the foreseeable future. We wish all species continued peace and prosperity. That was all. No complaints, no threats, no explanations, just silence. The second year brought the first signs of curiosity from the wider galaxy. Delegate Minara of the Hegemony of 12 Stars noticed that her trade reports showed a problem. The Hegemony had enjoyed a small but profitable exchange with human agricultural colonies for years. Humans, it turned out, had an almost supernatural ability to grow things in poor soil. Their techniques had helped revitalize several failing hegemony farming worlds. Now those worlds were failing again. Has anyone contacted the humans about renewing the agricultural exchange? Mynheer asked her staff. We've sent 12 formal requests over the past 8 months, her aide replied. They acknowledge receipt. Nothing more. Nothing more? What does that mean? It means they confirm they received our message. They don't respond to the actual content. Mynheer was confused. This wasn't how diplomacy worked. When someone sent a formal request, the other party was supposed to negotiate, discuss terms, ask for something in return. That was the game. You weren't supposed to just say nothing. The Vorthani discovered a similar problem around the same time. For decades, the Vorthani hive minds had quietly relied on human mathematicians to solve certain types of problems. The Vorthani were brilliant at many things, but their collective intelligence had blind spots. Humans thought differently. Their individual minds could see patterns that Vorthani hives missed entirely. It had been a minor arrangement, a few equations here and there. Humans seemed happy to help, and the Vorthani had paid them with interesting technology. Now the equations went unsolved. Vorthani navigation systems, which depended on these calculations, began to show errors. Ships arrived late, schedules collapsed. Minor inconveniences became major problems. Contact the humans, ordered the Vorthani Council. Offer them whatever they want. The message was sent. The acknowledgement came back. Nothing more. By the 5th year, the silence had become a topic of discussion in council halls. Has anyone successfully negotiated with the humans recently? Asked the Kraloth delegate during an informal gathering. Silence from the assembled diplomats. We've offered them technology transfers, said Delegate Minera. We've offered trade concessions. We've offered to support a renewed membership petition. They don't respond. Perhaps they destroyed themselves, suggested someone. It was only a matter of time, wasn't it? But they hadn't destroyed themselves. Surveillance drones at the edge of human space confirmed that Earth remained intact. Human ships still moved through their territory. Their colonies showed signs of growth. They simply weren't talking to anyone. This is absurd, gurgled the Vorthani delegate at a council session in the 8th year. They're being childish, petulant, like a youth who storms off after being told they can't have a sweet. High Arbiter Zilvex clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. They have broken no laws. They have made no threats. They have simply chosen not to engage with us. Then force them to engage. On what grounds? The Council cannot compel a species to be friendly. We could apply economic pressure, block their trade routes. What trade routes? They're not trading with anyone. Then we could threaten military action. Zilvex's compound eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. Against a species that hasn't made a hostile move in 8 years? The Council would never approve such aggression. Besides, why would we want to? They're a minor species. Let them sulk in their corner of space. But even as he said it, Zilvex felt a flicker of that old unease. Something about the human silence bothered him in ways he couldn't explain. The 10th year brought the first real crisis. The Thresh were a horror from beyond the galaxy. They appeared every few thousand years, emerged from the dark between stars, and consumed everything in their path. They had no interest in negotiation. They could not be reasoned with. They simply destroyed. The Galactic Council had faced the Thresh before. The combined fleets of 400 species had always been enough to push them back, though the losses were always terrible. This time was different. The Thresh had adapted. Their weapons, once manageable, now cut through Council shields like water through cloth. Their ships, once few in number, now arrived in swarms that blotted out the stars. The first engagement ended in catastrophic defeat. 17 Council fleets, representing the military might of 300 species, were destroyed in less than a day. The survivors reported that nothing they had seemed to hurt the enemy at all. The second engagement was even worse. Emergency sessions were called. Military strategists worked without rest, trying to find some weakness, some approach that might work. They found nothing. The Thresh pushed deeper into Council space. 3 core worlds fell. The populations were not conquered or enslaved. They were simply consumed. Billions of lives ended in hours. We need new approaches, said the Council's military commander. New tactics, new technologies, new ways of thinking about warfare that we haven't tried before. The humans, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. Every head turned. The humans, the speaker repeated. It was a minor diplomat from a minor species, someone who normally never spoke in such gatherings. Their history is practically nothing but war. They're creative about violence in ways most species aren't. They might see something we're missing. The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered the day of laughter, as some had begun to call it. Everyone remembered how the humans had been mocked and dismissed. They won't help, Delegate Minera said finally. We've tried contacting them about other matters. They never respond. This is different. Billions of lives are at stake. Then try again. Offer them everything. Maybe this time they'll listen. The message was sent. It detailed the Thresh threat. It explained the Council's desperate situation. It offered humanity full membership, technology transfers, trade rights, anything they wanted. The acknowledgement came back. Nothing more. The Thresh pushed closer. 5 more worlds fell. The crystalline spires of the Council station itself came under threat. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Council faced the very real possibility of extinction. In desperation, High Arbiter Zilvex made a decision. He would go to Earth personally. His ship entered human space alone. It was not challenged. It was not turned away. A human vessel appeared to escort it, silent and professional, guiding the Arbiter's ship to Earth orbit. Zilvex had never visited the human homeworld before. He looked down at it from orbit and saw a planet that seemed very much alive. Blue oceans and green continents and the lights of cities scattered across the night side. A shuttle took him down to the surface, to a complex of buildings overlooking a great expanse of water that humans called the Pacific Ocean. He was met by guards who said nothing and escorted down corridors that were simple but clean. Finally, he was shown into an office where a human woman sat behind a desk. Elena Vasquez had aged. Her hair was more gray than black now, and deep lines marked her face. She had risen from ambassador to Secretary General of the entire United Earth Confederacy. The woman who had walked out of the Grand Chamber now led her entire species. She looked up as Zilvex entered. Her eyes held no hostility, no anger, no resentment. They held nothing at all. "High Arbiter," she said. Her voice was polite and completely without warmth. "How can I help you?" Zilvex explained the situation. The thresh, the devastating losses, the desperate need for new ideas, new approaches, new ways of thinking about the threat. He spoke for nearly an hour, holding nothing back, admitting weaknesses and failures and fears that no arbiter had ever shared with an outsider. Elena listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "I see," she said. "That sounds serious." "It is. Billions have already died. Billions more will follow if we cannot find a solution. We need your help." "I understand." She said nothing more. Zilvex waited. The silence stretched. He had expected negotiations, demands, conditions. He had not expected this emptiness. "Secretary General," he finally said, "I am asking for your assistance. The Galactic Council is asking. What do you want in return?" Elena stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and red. She watched it for a long moment. "High Arbiter," she said quietly, "do you remember what happened in the Grand Chamber 15 years ago?" "I recall the session." "Your petition was denied." "You laughed at us." Her voice remained calm. 412 species. You laughed until the translator system struggled to keep up, and then you told us to go away for 1,000 years. Secretary General, surely you don't mean to let ancient grievances prevent you from helping innocent people. "It wasn't a grievance." Elena turned to face him. Her eyes still held that terrible emptiness. "It was an education. You taught us something valuable that day. You taught us exactly what we meant to the galaxy. And we listened. We were perhaps hasty in our judgment. Perhaps we would welcome humanity's membership now. Full membership, immediate effect." Elena smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "High Arbiter, I'm going to tell you something. And I want you to understand that I mean it with complete sincerity." She stepped closer to him. "We don't want your membership. We don't want your trade, your technology, or your approval. We want nothing from you at all." "Then you'll simply watch billions die?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "When we left that chamber," she said finally, "we made a decision. We would never again depend on anyone who could look at us and laugh. We would never again seek a seat at a table where we weren't welcome. We spent 15 years building something new, something that doesn't need your counsel." "Building what?" "That's not your concern." Elena walked to her desk and pressed a button. "Your escort will take you back to your ship. Have a safe journey home." Zilvex stood frozen. In 11,000 years, no species had ever refused the council. Not refused membership or refused trade, but refused even the basic courtesy of mutual interest. "You can't mean this," he said. "Can I? This is insane. We're offering you everything you asked for." 15 years too late. Elena sat down and began looking at documents on her desk, as though the most powerful being in the galaxy wasn't standing right in front of her. "Goodbye, High Arbiter." Zilvex was escorted from the planet in silence. As his ship left Earth's orbit, he looked back at the small blue world. It looked exactly as it had in the holographic display in the Grand Chamber all those years ago. Small, unremarkable, but something had changed, something fundamental. The humans weren't asking anymore. And somehow Zilvex realized with a cold feeling in his thorax, That was more frightening than any threat the Thresh could pose. He returned to the council station and reported his failure. The chamber erupted in outrage. How dare the humans refuse to help? How dare they put petty pride above the lives of billions? They were proving everything the council had said about them. Primitive, selfish, unworthy. But the outrage changed nothing. The humans remained silent, and the Thresh kept coming. In the end, the council survived. Barely. It took 3 more years and cost the lives of 17 species who were simply erased from existence. 43 worlds were reduced to ash. Entire civilizations that had existed for millennia were gone forever. The Grand Alliance that had maintained galactic order for 11,000 years emerged broken, diminished, and humbled. And throughout it all, humanity said nothing. Their ships occasionally appeared at the edges of battles, silent observers that neither helped nor hindered. They rescued survivors from destroyed vessels, regardless of species, depositing them at neutral stations before disappearing back into the dark. They never fired a shot. They never asked for anything in return. But the rescued survivors reported something strange. The human ships that saved them were different from anything they had seen before. They moved in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They appeared and disappeared without warning. Their hulls looked wrong somehow, as if they existed slightly outside of normal space. These reports were dismissed as the confused memories of traumatized survivors. Human technology was primitive. Everyone knew that, but the reports kept coming. And they kept saying the same things. The humans had changed. Nobody knew how. Nobody knew why. But something had happened in those 15 years of silence. Something that would soon shake the galaxy to its core. The Thresh War ended in the 18th year of human silence. The galaxy that emerged from that conflict bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before, where once 412 species had gathered in the Grand Chamber. Now only 395 remained. 17 entire civilizations had been erased from existence. Their worlds were dead. Their people were gone. Their histories survived only in council archives. 43 more worlds had been destroyed, even among the surviving species. Billions had died. Ancient alliances had shattered under the pressure of war and desperation. Old friendships had been broken by accusations and blame. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. Its authority was questioned. Its decisions were disputed. Species that had once cooperated without hesitation now looked at each other with suspicion. And throughout all of it, humanity had said nothing. They had not helped. They had not hindered. They had simply watched from the shadows, occasionally rescuing survivors, but never engaging with the conflict itself. Their silence had become a kind of legend among council species. Some called them cowards. Some called them wise. Most just tried not to think about them at all. But ignoring humanity was becoming harder. The reports from Thresh War survivors had not stopped. If anything, they had grown more detailed and more disturbing. Human ships that moved in impossible ways, technology that seemed to break the laws of physics, power levels that exceeded anything the Council had ever recorded. Chief Technician Aldara of the Kralith Collective was assigned to analyze the data. She was one of the finest scientific minds in the galaxy, a being of pure energy whose crystalline matrix had spent 2 centuries studying the fundamental nature of reality. What she found made no sense. These readings suggest their vessels are operating on principles we don't understand, she reported to the Council's Science Committee. Their ships don't appear to travel through normal space at all. They seem to move around it somehow, and their energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. How is that possible? Demanded the committee chair. 18 years ago, they were using crude fusion drives. They were centuries behind our most advanced members. I don't know how it's possible. I only know what the data shows. Then the data must be wrong. Sensor errors from traumatized survivors. Aldara's crystalline form pulsed with frustration. I've analyzed readings from over 300 separate incidents. They all show the same things. Either every survivor from the Thresh War experienced the exact same sensor malfunction, or the humans have developed technology that surpasses anything we possess. The committee voted to classify her report as unreliable and bury it in the archives. Nobody wanted to believe what she was suggesting, but reality has a way of making itself known. 2 years after the Thresh War ended, the hegemony of 12 stars faced a rebellion. This was not unusual. The hegemony had always been a harsh empire, ruling its member species through force and intimidation. Rebellions happened from time to time. They were always crushed. The current uprising was in the outer territories, on a world called Valen IV. The population was a species called the Cathari, peaceful beings who had been absorbed into the hegemony generations ago. They had endured hegemony rule for centuries, but the losses of the Thresh War had pushed them to breaking point. They wanted freedom. The hegemony response was standard procedure. A pacification fleet was dispatched. 30 warships, enough firepower to reduce Valen IV to rubble if necessary. The Cathari had no military. They would surrender or they would die. The fleet arrived to find human ships already there. Commander Thera of the hegemony flagship stared at her sensors in disbelief. 3 human vessels floated in orbit around Valen IV, positioned between the planet and her fleet. They were small compared to hegemony warships. They should have been no threat at all. But something about them made Thera's instincts scream warnings. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UEC Endeavor," a human voice announced over open communications. "We're here as neutral observers to ensure the safety of civilian populations. Please conduct your operations accordingly." Thara recovered from her surprise quickly. She was a veteran of dozens of campaigns. She would not be intimidated by 3 small ships. "Human vessel, you are trespassing in hegemony space during a military operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." "Negative, Commander. We'll be staying." Thara hesitated for a moment. The Council had always warned against provoking the humans during their silence. "Let them sulk," the diplomat said. "Don't give them a reason to become hostile." But this was different. This was hegemony territory, hegemony business, and Thara had her orders. "All ships," she commanded, "target the human vessels. Fire." 30 warships unleashed their weapons at once. Plasma lances, antimatter missiles, graviton beams. Enough destructive power to shatter a small moon. And then something impossible happened. The weapons fire stopped. It just stopped, hanging in space like frozen rain. Every beam, every missile, every pulse of energy simply halted in mid-flight. And then it turned around. The weapons that the hegemony fleet had fired came back at them. Not reflected, not absorbed and released. Just turned around and sent back along the exact paths they had traveled. 30 warships went dark in 13 seconds. Not destroyed. Thara realized this with relief as emergency systems kicked in. Their weapons were gone. Their engines were dead. Their shields had simply vanished. But the ships themselves were intact. Their crews were alive. They were just completely helpless. Human shuttles began launching from the 3 vessels in orbit. They descended to Valen IV and started evacuating Cathari civilians. Thousands of beings who had expected to die or surrender were loaded onto transports and carried away to safety. The hegemony fleet could do nothing but watch. After several hours, when the evacuation was complete, a final message came from the human vessels. "The United Earth Confederacy does not seek conflict with the hegemony of 12 stars. However, we will not stand idle while innocent people suffer. We suggest you reconsider your approach to internal disputes." The message was signed Captain Sarah Chen, UEC Endeavor. Then the human ships vanished. Not flew away, not accelerated into faster-than-light travel, just vanished as if they had never been there at all. Commander Thera sat in her darkened bridge and tried to understand what had just happened. Her entire fleet had been disabled in seconds. No casualties, no damage to the ships themselves, just a precise, surgical neutralization of every offensive capability they possessed. It would take weeks to repair. The Cathari would be long gone by then, and the humans had done it with 3 small ships. News of the Valen IV incident spread through the galaxy faster than light itself could travel. An emergency council session was called within hours. The Grand Chamber, once home to 412 species, now held only 395. But those who remained filled the space with shock and fear and demands for answers. "This is an act of war," thundered Delegate Manera of the hegemony. "They attacked a hegemony fleet without provocation. They defended themselves after being attacked," High Arbiter Zilvex pointed out. His voice was calm, but his compound eyes flickered with something that might have been concern. And they caused no casualties. That's not the point. They have weapons that can do that. Minara's forearms waved in agitation. They stopped our fire in mid-flight. They turned it back against us. They disabled 30 warships in seconds. How is that possible? We should have listened to Chief Technician Aldara, someone muttered. The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered the classified report, the one they had dismissed as unreliable. We need more information, Zilvex said finally. We need to know what the humans have developed and how they developed it. The Council authorized the most comprehensive intelligence operation in its history. Spy drones were sent to the edges of human space. Agents from a dozen species were dispatched to gather information. Every surviving record of human activity over the past 20 years was analyzed. What they discovered shattered everything the Council thought they knew. The humans had not been idle during their silence. They had been building. Somehow, through methods the Council's scientists couldn't explain, humanity had undergone a technological revolution that should have taken thousands of years. They had jumped from primitive fusion drives to something that allowed instant travel between stars. They had developed energy generation methods that seemed to violate known physics. Their manufacturing capabilities had increased by factors of thousands, and their military power was beyond anything the Council possessed. We believe they are using some form of dimensional manipulation, the lead intelligence analyst reported. Her voice shook as she spoke. Their ships don't exist fully in our space. They can step around normal reality somehow, and their weapons operate on principles we simply don't understand. How? Demanded Minara. How did they do this? They were nothing. They were primitives who hadn't even unified their own planet. The Vorthani delegate spoke up. Its gelatinous form rippled with something that might have been respect. They are humans, it said simply. When they feel threatened, they adapt. When they are told they cannot do something, they find a way. We gave them the greatest motivation imaginable. What motivation? We gave them something to prove. The analyst continued her report. It got worse. Humanity hadn't just advanced their technology. They had expanded their territory. What had been a handful of colonies around a single star had grown into a network of dozens of worlds. Human population had increased from 8 billion to nearly 40 billion in 20 years. And they had made friends. While the Council had been fighting the Thresh and recovering from the aftermath, humanity had been quietly building relationships with species outside the Council's sphere. Minor civilizations that the Council had ignored or dismissed. Young species that had been denied membership for the same reasons humanity had been denied. The humans had found them, approached them, offered partnership instead of hierarchy. We've identified at least 37 species that have entered into formal alliances with humanity, the analyst reported. Many of them have received technological assistance. Several have seen their own capabilities increase dramatically. They're building an alternative to the Council, Zilvex said quietly. His compound eyes had gone very still. It appears so. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species shouted at each other. Accusations flew. Some demanded immediate military action against humanity. Others argued for diplomacy. A few suggested surrendering to whatever demands the humans might make. Zilvex let the chaos continue for several minutes before calling for order. We have a problem, he said when the chamber finally quieted. A significant one. Humanity has become a major power in this galaxy, and we have no idea how to deal with them. Attack them before they attack us, Minara suggested. With what? You saw what happened at Valen 4. 3 of their ships disabled 30 of ours without trying. Our military analysts estimate that humanity could destroy our combined fleets in less than a day if they chose to. Then we negotiate, offer them whatever they want. We tried that. They don't want anything from us. Then what do we do? Zilvex was silent for a long moment. We ask nicely, he said finally. We send a formal diplomatic mission. We request a meeting. We treat them the way we should have treated them 20 years ago. And if they refuse, Zilvex's mandibles clicked softly, then we hope they continue to be as patient as they have been. The diplomatic mission was prepared with extreme care. Every courtesy protocol was observed. Every sign of respect that the council could offer was included. The message was sent. Days passed, then weeks. The council waited, helpless, for humanity to respond. Finally, after 2 months, a reply came. It was brief and polite. The United Earth Confederacy acknowledged the council's request. A meeting would be arranged. Location and time would be provided. The council celebrated as if they had won a great victory. They had made contact. The humans were willing to talk. But some of the older delegates noticed something about the reply that the younger ones missed. The humans had not asked for anything. They had not made demands or set conditions. They had simply agreed to meet. And there was something about that simple agreement, that calm and patient response, that felt more ominous than any threat could have been. The humans weren't angry. They weren't scared. They weren't even interested. They were simply willing to hear what the council had to say. And that somehow was the most terrifying thing of all. The meeting was held at a station called Haven's Rest. It was a place that had not existed 10 years ago. Now it was one of the largest structures in the known galaxy. It floated at the edge of human space, a massive complex of docking bays and living quarters and meeting halls that could accommodate thousands of species. It was neutral ground, not council territory, not human territory. A place where anyone was welcome, regardless of their political alignment or membership status. The council delegation arrived aboard a fleet of their finest ships, 50 vessels, representing the combined diplomatic might of 395 species. It was meant as a show of importance, a reminder that the council was still the dominant power in the galaxy. Looking at Haven's Rest, the delegation began to feel less certain. The station was swarming with activity. Ships came and went constantly. Beings from dozens of species walked its corridors. The council's intelligence reports had identified at least 70 different civilizations trading and meeting here. None of them were council members. High Arbiter Zilvex led the council delegation through the station's halls. He walked with the dignity expected of his position, but his compound eyes flickered constantly, taking in everything around him. Human security officers watched them pass. They were polite, but not friendly, professional, but not warm. They answered questions briefly and led the delegation to their destination without unnecessary conversation. The meeting room was large and comfortable. Seats had been provided for every species in the council delegation. Refreshments appropriate to each civilization's biology were available. Every courtesy had been observed. The human delegation was already waiting when the council arrived. Secretary General Elena Vasquez sat at the center of the human side of the table. She was old now, her hair completely white and her face deeply lined. But her eyes were the same as they had been 23 years ago, when she had walked out of the grand chamber. Calm, empty, patient. Beside her sat Admiral James Okonkwo, commander of the United Earth Confederacy's combined military forces. He was a large man with dark skin and gray hair and a face that revealed nothing. On her other side was Dr. Liu Wei, chief scientific advisor to the human government. She was small and sharp-featured, with the kind of quiet intensity that suggested a mind constantly working on problems no one else could see. Behind them stood a wall of human officers and officials. All of them watched the council delegation with the same patient, empty expressions. Zilvex took his seat at the center of the council's side. The other delegates arranged themselves around him. When everyone was settled, he cleared his throat. Secretary General Vasquez, he began, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. High Arbiter, Elena inclined her head slightly. You requested a meeting. We're listening. Zilvex had prepared extensively for this moment. He had speeches written, arguments developed, offers crafted, everything the council could possibly give, wrapped in the most respectful language their diplomats could create. Looking into Elena's empty eyes, he abandoned all of it. We were wrong, he said simply. The chamber went silent. Even the council delegates, who had expected a carefully scripted diplomatic dance, stared at him in surprise. 23 years ago, Zilvex continued, your species came before the council seeking membership. You presented your case with dignity and hope. You asked for nothing more than a chance to prove yourselves. He paused, his mandibles clicking softly. We laughed at you. 412 species united in mockery. We told you that you were too young, too primitive, too divided. We dismissed everything you had accomplished and everything you might become." He spread his upper limbs in a gesture of admission. "We were fools." Elena watched him without expression. "In the years since that day," Zilvex continued, "we have watched what you have become. Your technology now exceeds anything we possess. Your alliance network has grown to encompass species we ignored for millennia. Your intervention at Valen 4 demonstrated capabilities we cannot match." He lowered his head slightly, a gesture of submission that no High Arbiter had ever made to a non-Council species. "The Galactic Council formally invites humanity to full membership, with all rights and privileges thereof. We offer comprehensive trade agreements, scientific exchange programs, mutual defense pacts. Everything we denied you 23 years ago, we offer now, freely and without conditions." He raised his head and met Elena's eyes. "We are asking, Secretary General, please." The chamber fell silent again. Every being present waited for humanity's response. Elena looked at Zilvex for a long moment. Then she turned to Admiral Okonkwo and Dr. Liu. The three humans exchanged glances. No words were spoken, but an entire conversation seemed to pass between them in those few seconds. Finally, Elena turned back to the council delegation. 23 years ago," she said quietly, "I stood in your grand chamber and asked for a place at your table. I represented a young species, eager and hopeful. We wanted nothing more than to be part of something larger than ourselves, to contribute, to belong." She leaned forward slightly. "You laughed at us. The sound went on for almost 10 minutes, 412 species, unified in telling us we were worthless. And when you finally stopped laughing, you told us to go away for 1,000 years and try not to destroy ourselves." Zilvex's compound eyes flickered. "Secretary General, we have acknowledged our mistake." "Yes, you have." Elena's voice remained calm. 23 years later, after we developed technology that frightens you, after we built an alliance you can't ignore, after we demonstrated that we could destroy your fleets without effort, now you acknowledge your mistake." She sat back in her chair. "When we walked out of that chamber, we made a decision. We would never again depend on anyone who could look at us and laugh. We would never again seek acceptance from those who had to be frightened into giving it. Secretary General, the Council's offer is genuine. We truly want humanity as a partner." "I believe you do. Now. But what happens if our technology plateaus? What happens if our alliance weakens? What happens if we become less frightening?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Would you still want us then? Or would we become amusing primitives again?" Zilvex had no answer. "High Arbiter," Elena said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand that I mean it with complete sincerity." She stood, and the other human delegates stood with her. "We have built something in the silence you gave us. Not just technology, not just alliances. We have built a civilization that measures worth by character rather than age. A community where a species' value isn't determined by how long they've had faster-than-light travel or whether they've unified their planet." She looked around the chamber at the assembled council delegates. "We found the species you ignored, the young civilizations you dismissed, the different cultures you decided weren't worth noticing. We offered them partnership instead of hierarchy, cooperation instead of subordination. We showed them respect before they had to earn it by becoming powerful." Her eyes returned to Zilvex. "That's the difference between us, High Arbiter. You waited until we were strong to treat us with respect. We don't wait. We believe everyone deserves dignity from the start." Zilvex felt something cold settle in his thorax. "Then you refuse our offer?" "We don't refuse it. We simply don't need it." Elena gathered her documents. "The Human Concordat already includes 73 species. By next year it will include over 100. We have everything we wanted 23 years ago. Community, partnership, belonging. We built it ourselves, with allies who respected us when we had nothing." "Then why did you agree to meet with us at all?" Elena paused at the door. For the first time, something almost like warmth entered her eyes. "Because we're not cruel," she said. "We're not going to laugh at you. We're not going to mock your decline or celebrate your problems. We remember how that felt." She turned to face the council delegation fully. The Galactic Council is welcome to observe concordate proceedings. Individual council species are welcome to apply for concordate membership, though they will be evaluated by the same standards as everyone else. And if you face another threat like the Thresh, we will help defend innocent lives regardless of political alignment. But you won't join the council. No, we won't. Elena's expression remained gentle but firm. You wanted us to develop in peaceful isolation. You got exactly what you asked for. We developed. We found peace, and we're very happy with our isolation from you. She walked through the door. The other human delegates followed. Zilvex sat frozen in the meeting room. Around him, the combined diplomatic might of 395 species sat in stunned silence. They had offered humanity everything: full membership, trade rights, military alliance, acknowledgement of their mistake, and humanity had simply walked away. Again. The return journey to council space was quiet. The delegates barely spoke to each other. What was there to say? They had failed completely. Not through conflict or negotiation breakdown, but through something far more devastating. Humanity didn't care about them anymore. For 11,000 years, the Galactic Council had been the center of civilized space. Every species that mattered was either a member or wanted to be. The Council's approval meant everything. Its rejection meant isolation and irrelevance. Now there was an alternative, a growing alliance built on principles the Council had never considered. A community that didn't care about age or development level, or whether a species ate meat or slept too much. And humanity was at its center. Zilvex spent the journey thinking about Elena Vasquez, about the young woman who had stood before the council with hope in her eyes, asking for nothing more than a chance. About the old woman who had sat across the table from him today, her eyes empty of everything except patience. The council had created this. They had taken a young, hopeful species and taught them a harsh lesson about the nature of galactic politics. They had shown humanity exactly how much respect they could expect from older civilizations. And humanity had learned perfectly. They had learned that respect had to be earned through power, not given through kindness. They had learned that the strong dismissed the weak. They had learned that age and advancement mattered more than character or potential. And then they had decided to build something different. That was what hurt the most, Zilvex realized. Not that humanity had surpassed them technologically, not that they had built a rival alliance, but that they had taken the Council's own lessons and rejected them completely. The Council had taught humanity that the strong should mock the weak. Humanity had decided to be strong and still be kind. And now, 23 years too late, the Council was discovering what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that lesson. When the delegation returned to the Council station, they found the Grand Chamber in chaos. News of the failed meeting had spread somehow. Species were arguing, accusations were flying. Some blamed Zilvex for the diplomatic failure. Others blamed the species who had laughed the loudest 23 years ago. A few, very quietly, blamed the entire council system itself. Zilvex presided over the shouting with tired resignation. Let them argue. Let them blame. It changed nothing. Humanity had built something new, something that didn't need the council's approval, something that was growing while the council shrank, and there was nothing any of them could do about it. The age of the Galactic Council was ending. A new era was beginning, and humanity, the species that had been dismissed as worthless primitives, would be at its center. Zilvex looked up at the crystalline ceiling of the Grand Chamber. 11,000 years of history. 11,000 years of believing they were the heart of civilization, all of it crumbling. Because 23 years ago, they had laughed at the wrong species, and now it was far, far too late to take it back. 50 years had passed since the day of laughter. On Earth, it was a holiday now. Every year on that date, humans and their allies paused to remember the moment that had changed everything. Schools taught the story. Museums displayed artifacts from that time. Elderly humans who remembered watching the council recording as children told the tale to their grandchildren. The galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Council still existed, technically. The crystalline spires of the council station still reached toward their artificial sun. Representatives still gathered in the Grand Chamber to debate and vote. But the chamber was more than half empty now. Species had left. Not all at once, but steadily over the decades. Some had joined the human concordat directly. Others had simply drifted away, no longer seeing value in council membership. A few had collapsed entirely, unable to adapt to the new galactic order. High Arbiter Zilvex still held his position. He was ancient now, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His carapace had dulled with age, and his movements were slow and careful. But his compound eyes still flickered with intelligence, and his mind remained sharp. He presided over a council of 112 species, less than a third of what it had been in its glory days. Today's session was particularly painful. The motion to request observer status in the human concordat is on the floor, Zilvex announced. It was the Council's fifth such request. The previous four had been acknowledged politely and then ignored. No rejection, no acceptance, just silence. Humanity had learned that trick from them. The vote passed unanimously. Of course it did. What choice did they have? The Concordat now included over 200 species. Its economy dwarfed the Council's. Its technology was generations ahead. Its principles of equality and mutual respect attracted new members constantly. The Council was becoming irrelevant. Everyone knew it. After the session, Zilvex walked alone through the station's corridors. He did this often these days, walking and remembering. He remembered the Grand Chamber in its prime, filled with representatives from 412 species. He remembered the confidence they had all felt, the certainty that they were the center of civilized space. He remembered laughing at a young human woman who had dared to ask for a seat at their table. He wondered, not for the first time, what would have happened if they had said yes, if they had welcomed humanity, guided them, given them a chance to prove themselves within the existing system. Would things be different now? Probably, almost certainly. But they hadn't done that. They had laughed, and now they lived with the consequences. Across the galaxy, on a station called Concordat Prime, a very different gathering was taking place. The Human Concordat's annual assembly brought together representatives from 217 species. They came from every corner of the galaxy, young civilizations and old ones, large species and small. Beings of flesh and energy and silicon, and things that defied easy categorization. They gathered not in a grand chamber designed to awe and intimidate, but in a simple hall built for function and comfort. There were no raised platforms for more important species, no hierarchy of seating based on age or power. Every delegate sat at the same level as equals. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the hall's entrance, watching the delegates arrive. She was old now, her hair completely white and her body marked by decades of service, but she stood straight and her eyes remained sharp. She had seen more in her lifetime than most humans could imagine. War and peace, tragedy and triumph, the birth of a new galactic order. And through it all, she had never forgotten where it started. A young Vorthani approached her. His name was Trinex, and he was the first of his species to be born outside council space. His parents had been among the earliest Vorthani to join the Concordat, rejecting the council that had represented their kind for millennia. "Admiral Chen," he said, his gelatinous form rippling with respect. "It's an honor to meet you." Sarah smiled. "The honor is mine, delegate. Your work on the Integration Committee has been outstanding." Trinex rippled with pleasure at the compliment. "I learned from the best. Human schools taught me that every voice matters. That's not how the council raised my parents. Times change." "They do. Thanks to your people." Trinex hesitated. "May I ask you something, Admiral?" "Of course. Is it true? The story about the Day of Laughter? Did the council really mock humanity like that?" Sarah's smile faded slightly. "It's true. I wasn't there, but I watched the recording. The whole galaxy watched eventually. It seems impossible. How could they have been so blind?" Sarah looked out at the assembled delegates, species that had been ignored by the council, civilizations that had been dismissed as unworthy, all of them working together now as equals. "They weren't blind," she said finally. "They were confident. They had been the center of everything for 11,000 years. They couldn't imagine that anything they did might be wrong. And then you proved them wrong. Not me, all of us. Sarah gestured at the hall. Everyone who believed that strength didn't have to mean cruelty. Everyone who decided to build something better instead of just complaining about what was. Trenex was quiet for a moment. What happens to the council now? They've requested observer status again. I know. Will you grant it this time? Sarah considered the question. The council had been making these requests for years. Each time, the Concordate's leadership had discussed it and decided to wait. Not as punishment, not for revenge, but because observer status meant something in the Concordate. It meant a species was ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to embrace new ways of thinking. Was the council ready for that? That decision isn't mine to make, Sarah said finally. It's up to the whole assembly. What would you vote? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She thought about all the years of silence, the Valen 4 incident, the meetings that went nowhere, the empty apologies that came decades too late. She thought about Elena Vasquez, who had died 10 years ago and been mourned by 100 species. The woman who had walked out of the Grand Chamber in silence and spent the rest of her life building something to replace what she had been denied. What would Elena want? The answer came easily. I would vote yes, Sarah said, not because they deserve it, but because that's who we decided to be. We give everyone a chance, even those who laughed at us. Trenex rippled with surprise. Even after everything, especially after everything. Sarah turned to face him fully. The council taught us that the strong should mock the weak. We decided to be different. If we start punishing people for not meeting our standards, we become exactly what we were fighting against. She looked back at the assembly hall, where delegates from 217 species were taking their seats. Beside, she added quietly, they've suffered enough. Watching everything they built crumble while we grew. That's punishment enough for anyone. The assembly began a few minutes later. Hundreds of delegates discussed trade agreements and scientific collaborations and mutual defense plans. Decisions were made through consensus rather than voting. Disagreements were resolved through discussion rather than power plays. Near the end of the session, the question of the council's observer status was raised. The debate was brief. A few delegates argued against it. Old wounds still ached for some, but most agreed with the position that Sarah had expressed to Trinex. They had built the Concordate on principles of inclusion and respect. Denying the council would be denying those principles. The decision was made. Observer status would be granted. The council would be welcomed, not as the leaders they once were, but as students, learners, species who might, if they were willing, find a place in the new galactic order. It was not revenge. It was not punishment. It was simply the Concordate being what it had always been, better. On the council station, High Arbiter Zilvex received the news of the Concordate's decision. He read the message 3 times, certain he had misunderstood. They had said yes. After all the requests, all the silence, all the years of being ignored, just as the council had once ignored humanity, they had finally said yes. Zilvex wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, certainly. This was what the council had asked for, but also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like shame. They had been given a chance, not because they had earned it, not because they had become powerful or important, but simply because that was who the Concordate was. The council had denied humanity for being too young, too weak, too different. The Concordate was accepting the council despite everything they had done. It was exactly the opposite of everything the council had stood for, and somehow that made Zilvex feel worse than if they had been rejected. He would have to address the council.